Hi everyone and welcome to the PhD Mentor, the podcast where we unpack the real, often messy experience of academic life and help you navigate your journey with insight, honesty and support. I'm your host, Professor Manousos Klados, and today we are diving into a topic that hits very close to home for so many of us, the impostor syndrome. If you ever sat through a lab meeting thinking everyone here is smarter than me, or you felt like you're just faking it and it's only a matter of time before someone finds out, you are far from alone. I have been also there. As a PhD student, I often felt like I was wearing a mask, like I had somehow fooled the system and didn't really belong in academic spaces. And yet every achievement, every publication, every step forward was real. However, the doubt was just louder than the evidence. So in this episode, we are going to explore what impostor syndrome really is, why it's so common among the PhD students, and how you can begin to manage and even grow through those feelings. I will also share my personal journey with impostor syndrome because, sometimes just knowing someone else has been through it can make a big difference. And if you are looking for support beyond, this podcast, I also work with PhD students as a coach. So whether you are struggling with confidence, motivation, or you just need help finding your direction, I'm here to help you. So, let's continue. Grab your favorite drink, take a deep breath, and let's talk about what it really means to feel like an impostor and how to start reclaiming back your confidence. Because I think a lot of us throw the term impostor syndrome around without really understanding how deep it goes or how much it can shape our experience in academia, I think that it's better to start this podcast by the heart of what impostor syndrome is. The term impostor syndrome was first, coined back in 1978 by two psychologists, Pauline, Clance, I think, and Suzanne Imes, who were studying high-achieving women who, despite their academic and professional accomplishments, consistently felt like frauds. These women couldn't internalize their success. They believed they would somehow the system tricked everyone around them and didn't actually deserve the recognition they received. Now let's come to today where we know that impostor syndrome isn't just a woman's issue. It shows up in people of all genders, all ages, and in all kinds of professions. But it's especially, evident in academia and the a PhD community in general. So, what does impostor syndrome look like? It can be subtle. You might feel like you don't really know enough to be in your program. You might hesitate to ask questions in class or at conferences because you are worried people will discover how little you actually know. You might think that your peers are doing far better than you, writing more, publishing more, understanding more, and that you are the only one who secretly drawing. It can be also more extreme. Maybe you have had moments where you have seriously, considered quitting, not because you are not capable, but mainly because you believe you have somehow, as I said, fooled the system into admitting you, and it's only a matter of time before someone reveals you. That creeping fear that you are not good enough and your success isn't real, that it's all going to unravel at any moment, and that's the core of the impostor syndrome. And do you know what is, the worst part? It doesn't go away with success. Actually, for many of us, the more we accomplish, the louder the inner critic becomes. You finish a chapter and your brain says, yes, but it's not so good as what others could write. You get accepted into a conference and your brain says they probably had a low number of submissions this year. You publish a paper and you think that it was probably luck. The reviewers miss out something. I have heard this from many PhD students, and not only PhD students, but postdocs and professors. I have coached many PhD students, and also I lived it myself. Impostor syndrome is relentless if you don't name it, if you don't bring it into the light. But let me be clear, feeling like an impostor doesn't mean you are one. In fact, the irony is that impostor syndrome usually strikes the most capable and conscientious people, the ones who care deeply about doing things right, who set high standards, who reflect critically on their work. And these traits make you a strong academic, but they also make you more vulnerable to these feelings of fraudulence. So now let's talk briefly about the psychology of what's going on. The impostor syndrome is what psychologists call a cognitive distortion. It's a pattern of thinking that it's irrational but feels very, very, very real. It's rooted in perfectionism, self-doubt, fear or failure, as well as social comparison. In academic settings, these elements are everywhere. You may recognize them. Your work is constantly being evaluated. You are surrounded by brilliant people. And let's be honest, there is often a culture of silence where everyone pretends you've got it all figured out. The silence creates the illusion that you are the only one struggling, when in fact most people around you are quietly dealing with the same exact doubts. So what we can do about that? Well, the first step is exactly what we are doing right now. We name it. We recognize the problem. Understanding that the impostor syndrome is not a personal failing but a common psychological experience is powerful. Once you recognize it, you can start to question it. You can begin to ask, is this thought true, or is just the impostor syndrome talking? The second step is to talk about it. Bring it up with your peers, your mentors, your supervisor, if you feel safe to do so. You will probably be surprised how many people say, oh my god, me too, I also have these thoughts, and so on. Actually, these conversations are those that help break the illusion of isolation and that can be incredibly healing. The third step that actually helped me is to track your wins. Keep a success journal. Every time you receive good feedback, finish a task or achieve something, write it down. When that inner voice says you don't belong here, you will have tangible evidence to the contrary. And if you are listening to this thinking, that's all sound good, but I still feel like I'm faking it, I completely understand you. This takes time. Rewiring the brain and ourselves, especially after years of internalizing the doubts, it's not a quick fix. But believe me, it's possible. With reflection, support, and the right tools, you can start to trust your own mind again. As a coach, I often work with PhD students who came to me feeling stuck, sometimes in their writing, sometimes in their motivation, often in their confidence. One of the most common things I hear is, I feel like, I'm not cut out for this. And more often than not, it turns out that they are not actually struggling with ability, but they're actually struggling with impostor syndrome. And that's where coaching can be transformational, because it's not just about giving you productivity tools or time management tricks. It's about helping you shift your mindset. It's about reminding you that you are not broken. You are not behind. You are not an accident. You are on the path that is incredibly difficult, and you are showing up every day doing the work. If that sounds like, the kind of support you need, I would love to hear from you and discuss more about this problem, and I can help you build confidence, resilience, and your momentum in your academic life. So, to wrap up what we said so far, impostor syndrome is real. It's painful. It's widespread. But it's also not a life sentence. You can understand it, name it, challenge it. And slowly but surely you can quiet this voice that says you are not enough, you are not good. Because you are enough, you are not there here by mistake, and you have every right to take up space in this world of ideas and discovery. So we have talked about what impostor syndrome is and how it shows up in the minds and hearts of high capable people. Now let's zoom in on a specific, let's say, environment where impostor syndrome thrives. And can you imagine what is this? Of course, it's PhD programs. You might be wondering, why do so many PhD students feel like this way? Why is it so common to feel like a fraud or a liar even when you are clearly progressing? Believe me, it's not a coincidence. In fact, there are very, very specific reasons that the structure and culture of doctoral education create the perfect storm for impostor syndrome. Let me break it down for you. First of all, and the foremost, the nature of the PhD itself. A PhD, actually, what is it? Is an exercise in uncertainty. You are not just learning existing knowledge, you are trying to create new knowledge. And that is incredibly difficult. Most of the times you are working at the edge of what is known. You are reading papers where even the experts don't always agree. You are asking questions no one has answered yet. And what does it mean? This means that there is no a clear roadmap. No fixed set of right answers, and that ambiguity can make even the most brilliant minds to feel lost. And when we feel lost, our brain looks for explanations. And one of the most common explanations we came up with is, I must not be good. Second is about comparison. PhD programs are full of smart, driven people. Of course, this is inspiring, but it also creates a high pressure inside the research environment. It's very easy to fall into the trap of comparing yourself to others. She published in 3 papers already. He seems so confident at conferences, or they are already teaching, doing field work and writing full time. And what I'm doing? Nothing. But here is the truth. We are usually comparing our behind-the-scenes footage to someone else's high-heel reel. You don't see the nights they stayed up crying over reviewer comments. You don't hear the panic in their head when they give that confident-sounding presentation. You only see the polished product, and when you compare yourself to that, of course you will feel like you are falling short. Okay, let's now have a look in another thing, in academic culture, and this one is huge. Academia doesn't always make space for vulnerable people. There is often an unspoken rule that you are supposed to be self-assured, articulate, and always on top of your game. Admitting uncertainty, confusion, or fear can feel like weakness, even though it's actually the mark of a reflective, thoughtful scholar. Because of this, many of us learn to perform confidence, actually, and we put on our brave faces. We know when we don't understand, we keep our questions to ourselves, and the tragedy is that everyone around us is doing the same thing. So, we all end up thinking we are the only ones struggling, when in fact we are all struggling silently together. This is especially true in hyper-competitive environments like top-tier institutions, elite labs, prestigious fellowships, and so on. The more selective the environment is, the more pressure we feel to prove we belong there. And that pressure feeds impostor syndrome like oxygen feeds the fire. Another major contributor is feedback culture in academia. PhD students receive, let's say, a constant stream of critique from supervisors, reviewers, committee members, peers, etc. And while constructive criticism is essential for our growth, it is also easy to internalize it as proof of inadequacy, especially if we are already, let's say, doubting ourselves. If your brain is already saying, you know, you are not so good, and then you get the paper back with 50 comments, your brain is not going to say, oh, I've got helpful suggestions. It's going to say, see, I knew I couldn't do this. And unfortunately, many academics were never taught how to give feedback in a way that supports growth while preserving self-confidence. So the comments you receive, especially early on, can feel brutal, personal, or even dismissive. Of course, we should not forget the isolation. PhD work is often, let's say, lonely. You are working on a project no one else fully understands. You spend long hours reading, writing, coding, analyzing, often without daily interaction or affirmation. If you are lucky, you are in a cohort that checks in with each other, but many PhD students work solo or in labs where collaboration is limited or where competition outweighs community. And that isolation compounds the imposter voice. Because, you know, in the absence of reassurance, we fill the silence with doubt. We assume everyone is managing better. We convince ourselves that our confusion or uncertainty is unique. Now, add to all this the pressure of external validation. PhD students are often on fixed-term funding, hoping for grants, fellowship, or jobs at the end of the road. The constant need to prove your worth on paper, to publish, present, and produce can shift your focus from learning and discovery to validation and survival. When your sense of self-worth depends on acceptance letters and citations, impostor syndrome thrives. And we haven't enough touch on underrepresentation. If you come from a background that's historically marginalized in academia, whether due to gender, race, socioeconomic status, disability, or being a first-generation scholar, impostor syndrome can be magnified. You might feel a pressure to present your group perfectly, or feel like you don't quite fit the mold of what a scholar is, or how it's supposed to look or sound like. Believe me, that's not your fault. That's the product of systemic issues. And it means that for many PhD students, impostor syndrome isn't just psychological, it's also cultural and structural issue. So when we ask, why is impostor syndrome so common in PhDs, the answer is because the system unintentionally cultivates it. Now, don't get me wrong, but there are wonderful things about the PhD experience: intellectual freedom, deep curiosity, the joy of discovering something new. But we also have to be honest about the conditions that make many of us feel like we don't belong, even when we absolutely do it. You see me that I'm very passionate about that, and that's why I became, let's say, a PhD coach. Because once you start to recognize these dynamics, not just in yourself but in the system, you can begin to reclaim your power. You can say, hey, I'm not broken, I'm reacting normally to a very high pressure, let's say, under-supported environment. And from there you can start to build tools, habits, and mindsets that support you, not just the institution. Whether it's developing a writing routine that doesn't burn you out, navigating feedback with less self-criticism, or learning to advocate for your own boundaries and needs, coaching offers a space where you can reflect, reset, and rebuild your confidence. Because the truth is, you're already good enough. The doubt is part of the journey, but it doesn't have to define you. So, in this part of the episode, I have planned something very difficult for me. Actually, not so difficult now, but it was difficult. And I want to open up about something that is deeply personal. My own journey with impostor syndrome, and not during my PhD, interestingly, but my real experience with it began when I was already a postdoc. 10 years ago, I was working at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences in Leipzig. On paper, it was a dream role. I was part of a world-class research environment surrounded by some of the most respected scientists in cognitive neuroscience, and it was exciting. But internally, I was unraveling. I remember walking the corridors, passing brilliant minds I admire and thinking, what I'm doing here? They must have made a mistake for sure. I had the degrees, of course. I had the publications, a lot of publications. I had done everything right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was an impostor, a fraud. That somehow I had slipped through the cracks and was now pretending to be something I wasn't. And you know what it made it worse? That I should have felt confident. I should have been proud. I had earned my place, but the more I achieved, the more my inner voice whispered, soon they will figure it out. That's, the strange and painful paradox of imposter syndrome. It doesn't disappear with accomplishment. In fact, for many of us, the more we succeed, the more disconnected we feel from the success. It doesn't register. It doesn't stick. I spent much of that time in silent doubt. I pushed myself hard, too hard I think, trying to overcompensate. I worked long hours, rarely asked for help, and questioned everything I did. On the outside, I looked like a confident young researcher, but on the inside, I felt like I was always on the edge of being exposed. And the silence around me made it much worse. No one talked about feelings like this. Everyone seemed self-assured. I didn't want to be the one to admit the weakness, so I kept in. Looking back now, I wish I would understood then what I understand today. Impostor syndrome doesn't mean you are inadequate. It means you are human. The real turning point for me didn't come until years later. By that time, I had moved into new roles, grown as a researcher, started mentoring others, and it was through mentoring, through listening to PhD students and early career researchers confide me, that something clicked. They described the same thoughts, the same fears, and the same spiral of doubt that I had carried during my postdoc years. And you know something? I started to realize we are not the exception, we are the rule. That realization made me dig deeper. I began reading more about imposter syndrome, not just as a personal issue, but as a systemic experience. I learned that it's not just about individual psychology. It's all about the environments we work in, the cultures that reward perfection and punish vulnerability, the unspoken hierarchies, the pressure to know more, do more, and generally be more, always. I realized that I had spent years trying to fix myself when what I really needed was to see the system that was make me feel broken. And that shift changed everything. Instead of asking what's wrong with me, I start asking, why do so many of us feel like this way? This is wrong. The answer wasn't because we are all secretly underqualified. It's because we are swimming in waters that don't always allow us to feel secure. Academia, celebrates brilliance but often hides the process behind it. The mess, the confusion, the missteps. So we end up thinking we are the only ones who don't have it all figured out. And that's when I started telling my story more openly. I talked about my experience at Max Planck, about how I spent years doubting my worth in one of the most respected institutions in Europe. And every time I told it, people nodded. They understood. They had been there too. That was the beginning of a new mission for me, not just as a researcher but as a mentor and coach. Today, when I work with PhD students and postdocs through the PhD mentor, I often meet incredibly bright, capable individuals who still carry the imposter feeling. They come to me saying things like, I don't think I'm cut out for this, or I just got lucky, or one day they will realize I don't belong in that space. And I get it, because I have been there. But also I know that those feelings are not proof of failure. They are signs that these people are in a high-stakes environment where vulnerability is hard to show. And that's something that we can work together. Not, by pretending the feelings that don't exist or irrationalize that feelings, but by understanding them, challenging them, and building new relationship with success. One of the biggest lessons I've learned, and that I now pass to others, is this: impostor syndrome doesn't mean you don't belong. It means you care. It means you are reflective, you have standards, you take your work seriously. That's not something to be ashamed of, that's something to honor. And more importantly, the thoughts that tell you are a fraud, they are not facts, they are just thoughts. And we don't have to believe everything we think. What helped me move forward wasn't a sudden burst of confidence, it was a slow and intentional process. It was learning to track reality instead of my fears. It was, let's say, choosing to trust the people who believed in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself. And it was building a support network, a place where I could speak openly, ask questions without shame, and show up as I truly was. And this is the main reason why I created the PhD Mentor, which is not just a podcast but a coaching practice. Because we all need that space, a space to be seen without needing to prove ourselves, a space to build not just knowledge but self-trust. So if you are listening and thinking this is me, I want to say something clearly. You are not a fraud. You are a researcher in progress. You are someone walking a difficult and meaningful path, and you are not the only one who has ever doubted themselves. You belong here just as much as anyone else in your department, your field, or your institution. I would love to hear from you, and if you hear this podcast and someone feels like this, I'm very open to have a common podcast together. And also, if you would like to learn more about these options, just reach out to me, and believe me, you don't have to navigate this alone. So far we have talked about what impostor syndrome is, why it thrives in academia, and I've shared my own journey through it, particularly during my time as a postdoc at the Max Planck Institute. Now it's time to talk about something really important, and this is what can we do about it. Because while impostor syndrome might feel like an unshakable part of life in academia, it doesn't have to control your experience. There are real, actionable ways to manage it. Not to cure, of course, overnight, this isn't magic, but to soften its grip, to reframe your thinking, and to give yourself the freedom to grow, even while self-doubt occasionally tags along for the ride. So let's see some strategies that have worked for me and for the PhD students I coach, and for countless others navigating this same path. The most important and the first strategy is to name it. Name the impostor. When you notice that familiar narrative creeping in, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve this, I fooled everyone, try saying to yourself, oh, that's my impostor voice talking. Create the small mental distance between you, the thought, and the thought that gives you power. It turns an overwhelming emotional state into something you can observe, reflect on, and eventually challenge. But remember, having the thought doesn't make it true. Thoughts are not facts, they are just mental events. You can notice them without believing them. The second strategy is the reality logging. One technique that actually I have used myself and recommend often in coaching is what I call reality logging, which is simple but powerful. Start a document, journal, or notes file where you record the evidence of your real performance, not your fears, not your insecurities, just facts. Did someone praise your research? Write it down. Did you explain your work clearly to a colleague? Note that. Did your supervisor accept your chapter with minimal revision? That goes in too. Over time, this becomes a bank of truth, a counterweight to the impostor narrative. And on those inevitable hard days, you can revisit and remind yourself, there are not illusions, there are real moments of competence. Third is to redefine success. Many of us define success in academia in incredibly narrow terms. Published papers, external funding, flawless presentations. But real success, especially in a PhD, is more complex. So try to reframe it as progress, not perfection. Ask yourself at the end of the week, what did I learn? What did I attempt it? Or how did I show up even when I didn't feel confident? Celebrating effort, not just the outcomes, helps break the perfectionist loop that fuels impostor syndrome. The fourth one, talk to safe people. This is a big one because impostor syndrome thrives in silence, but similarly, it shrinks in the presence of trusted conversation. Reach out to peers, mentors, friends, even supervisor if the relationship allows, and talk about how you are feeling. It doesn't need to be a grand confession. Sometimes it's enough to say, I'm struggling to feel like I belong right now. You will be amazed at how often the response is, oh, me too. If you didn't feel like you have people in your immediate academic circle, join an online PhD support group or a writing community. So what I mean is surround yourself with people who normalize the messing of research, not just the highlights. Fifth is to reframe the feedback. I know that feedback is a huge trigger for impostor syndrome. One piece of critique can feel like a total invalidation of our work. But here is a truth that changed the game for me. Feedback is a tool, not a verdict. Even harsh comments, when reframed, can become an invitation to grow, not condemnations of your worth. Try reading reviewer or supervisor comments with a pen in hand and two questions in mind. What I can learn from this? What is not being said here? Often the silence speaks volumes. A paper written with few suggestions doesn't mean you are a failure, but it often means this is solid and here's how you can make it better. The sixth, to limit the harmful comparison. Actually, I know that we all do it. Scrolling through Twitter, we hear about colleagues' awards, see a friend publish another one paper, and immediately we feel like we are falling behind. Here's the thing, we compare our inside to someone else outside. This is never a fair fight. If comparison is a major trigger for you, consider setting boundaries. Limit your social media exposure when you are feeling so vulnerable. Mute or unfollow accounts that fuel unhealthy competition. Curate your digital environment with inspiration, not intimidation. And when you find yourself comparing, pause and ask, what's really bothering me here? Sometimes it's less about their success and more about our own uncertainty. 7. Practice self-compassion. This is this might not sound, hard, but it's crucial. Impostor syndrome is, at its core, a form of internalizing shame. It tells us we are not too good enough, smart enough, or worth enough. The antidote to shame is compassion. When you make a mistake, don't berate yourself. Try talking to yourself the way you would talk to a struggling friend. You wouldn't say, you are hopeless. You would say, it's okay, mate. You are learning. You will figure it out. This is a practice. It takes time, but it can slowly rewire the inner narrative that keeps us stuck in a self-doubt. 8. You should create a resilient routine. Sometimes what we need isn't a mindset shift, it's a structure. When everything feels uncertain, routines can give us a sense of control. Creating regular habits about and around writing, short and consistent sessions, breaks, intentional time away from your work, or to reflect with yourself in a weekly, let's say, schedule. This consistently builds trust in yourself. Even on days when confidence is low, routines can carry you through. 9. Know when to seek support. If imposter syndrome is severely affecting your mental health, motivation, or ability to work, please don't keep pushing through alone. Talking to a therapist, counselor, or coach can help you untangle the deeper roots of those thoughts and develop strategies that tailor to you. As a coach, I help PhD students and early career researchers navigate these waters every day. Coaching isn't about giving you more pressure, it's about offering perspective, tools, and accountability in a way that supports your well-being. So, some final thoughts now. And here it's my takeaway message. You are not an impostor. You are a human being doing difficult, creative, and meaningful, let's say, inside in a complex system. The voice that tells you you don't belong here, it's not truth. It's a reflection of stress, fear, and culture. And you can learn to hear it, acknowledge it, and keep going in any case. Impostor syndrome may never fully disappear, but you can outgrow its power. And on the other side of that process, it's something better than perfection. It's confidence built on reality, resilience, and self-respect. That brings us to the end of this episode of the PhD Mentor podcast. I want to sincerely thank you for spending this time with me, for listening with an open heart, and for being part of a conversation that so many of us need, but we rarely have out loud. If today's episode resonated with you, if you have ever wrestled with imposter syndrome or felt alone in your academic journey, please know that you are not alone. And more importantly, you don't have to go through it alone. If you found value in what you heard, I would be incredibly grateful if you could subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone else who might need it, a fellow PhD student or a colleague, or even your lab group. You never know who might need to hear that, and believe me that they may belong there too. So, until next time, take care of yourself and keep going. You've got this. Bye bye.